All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. If you've ever looked at Suzanne Collins' absolutely massive story and thought, oh, it's just a brutal physical survival competition, well, we're going to completely reframe that for you right now. We're actually going to look under the hood of this fascinating and, frankly, terrifying study of systemic inequality.
So, what's the real threat here? You might naturally think the worst enemy out there is the wilderness, right? Or maybe a highly trained killer swinging a sword. I mean, the primal equation of survival almost always revolves around physical grit, finding water, enduring the elements, all that stuff. But what happens when the wilderness isn't your primary enemy? What happens when the absolute most dangerous thing you're facing is actually a television camera? We're going to completely shift the paradigm here. We want to show how you are actually fighting a rigged socioeconomic system. A system where a carefully choreographed smile is literally better than a sword. Because in Panem, you aren't just fighting nature or other combatants. You're going up against an entire society that has rigged the game way before you even set foot on the battlefield. The absolute weaponization of public relations is the true survival mechanism we're talking about today. To really unpack this, we'll be breaking things down into 5 key areas. First, we'll look at the true battlefield. Then we'll explore the currency of labor, followed by the currency of image. After that, we'll dive into the weapon of vulnerability, and finally, wrap it all up with the ultimate rebellion.
All right, so let's get into it with our first point, understanding this true battlefield, which is really just a completely rigged socioeconomic system. And that leads us right into our second core concept, the currency of labor, and specifically how control operates in District 12. Now, the capital uses internal psychological infrastructure rather than physical fences to control the grinding poverty of the seam. Sure, they have this massive, high chain link fence topped with barbed wire that's supposedly electrified 24/7. But because of power shortages, it's usually dead silent. So the physical fence, it's almost secondary to the psychological one. And the absolute most insidious tool they have for that psychological control is the tessera. It's a meticulously crafted monopoly tactic to keep the poor fiercely fighting each other for scraps instead of, actually uniting against the capital. It totally shatters the illusion that the reaping is just some simple, fair lottery. When you turn 12, your name goes in once. But if your family is starving, you can trade additional entries of your name for a meager year's supply of grain and oil. So it's basically a dystopian lottery where the tickets literally cost your life and only the absolute poorest are forced to buy in. And the cruel mathematics of this system perfectly highlight the vast disparity between the merchant class and the starving citizens. By the time Katniss is 16, her name isn't in there just the mandatory 5 times. It's in there 20 times, just to keep her family alive. Meanwhile, Madge, the mayor's daughter from the merchant class, only has 5 entries. And then just look at Gale. Gale has a staggering 42 entries. 42! What that means is his rage gets directed horizontally at his neighbor Madge, effectively dividing and conquering the population. I mean, he single-handedly feeds a family of 5, so he is vibrating with anger at the merchant class, who don't have to gamble their lives for a loaf of bread. The capital just perfectly executes this divide-and-conquer strategy at the level of basic human sustenance. If the citizens are divided by envy and guilt and systemic unfairness, they're never going to achieve the solidarity required to unionize and mount a vertical rebellion against the capital. Then we get to Reaping Day. When little 12-year-old Primrose's single slip is pulled out of thousands, that one specific visual detail, her untucked ducktail blouse, it just grounds the absolute horror of a rigged system. It snaps Katniss right into volunteering and exposes the absolute lie of the whole system. But you know what's truly fascinating here? It's how the crowd reacts to Katniss stepping up to take her sister's place. Because nobody claps. Instead, the crowd gives this silent 3-finger salute. And that completely strips the capital of their required enthusiastic spectacle. It really proves to be the boldest form of dissent you can have without actually breaking a law. You see, in a totalitarian regime, an outright riot gets you bombed, right? But this complete, organized silence, it's a unanimous statement from thousands of people essentially saying, we do not condone this. It functions as a localized, synchronized strike, effectively taking away the one single thing the capital demands from the reaping, the spectacle of participation. But of course, the capital doesn't let them just sit with that victory. The boy tribute drawn is Peeta Mellark, the boy who once intentionally burned bread and took a physical beating from his own mother just to give a starving Katniss some food. So Katniss enters the games entirely destabilized. Peeta's past gift of bread creates this massive cognitive dissonance that her barter-oriented brain literally cannot process. Think about it. Her entire framework is built on a strict barter economy.
trading squirrels for salt. The ledger is always clean. But owing someone your life, an unpaid moral debt to a boy you are now contractually obligated to murder on national television, that completely breaks her worldview far more than an opponent with a knife ever could.
So that brings us nicely to our third point, the currency of image and the overwhelming spectacle of the Capitol. Leaving the grinding starvation of the seam for the sudden opulence of instant hot chocolate and creamy orange sauce showers, it's a profound culture shock. But that opulence is intentionally disorienting. It's designed to make the tributes feel small, primitive, and completely dependent on the Capitol's machine. And it's not just about showing off wealth either. It's about showing the absolute cost of defiance. During dinner, Katniss recognizes a servant, an Avox girl whose tongue was literally cut out for treason. The Capitol ensures obedience by mutilating dissidents and placing them as servants, weaponizing the survivor as a constant walking reminder of the futility of rebellion. By placing her right there in the dining room, the Capitol creates an inescapable cruelty. Even in moments of supposed luxury and rest, the tributes are constantly surveilled by a living, breathing monument to terror. There is simply nowhere to look away.
And it's in this hyper-controlled, image-obsessed environment that Katniss meets her stylist, Cinna. Now, Cinna essentially acts as a crisis PR manager. He transforms Katniss into a brand because he knows sponsors don't buy into physical prowess, they buy into a compelling narrative. The Capitol's media strategy completely relies on isolating these 24 kids as solitary, cutthroat monsters. But Cinna, he flips the script. First, he makes Katniss the girl on fire, using synthetic flames. Then, during the chariot ride, he tells Katniss and Peeta to hold hands. It is such a subtle, almost imperceptible rebellion. They present a united front, creating instant intrigue. Suddenly, they aren't isolated monsters anymore. They're a team.
But, as we know, a manufactured brand has to be backed up by action. During the private evaluation, the game makers, who, let's be real, are essentially just bored, intoxicated television producers, completely ignore Katniss to look at a freshly roasted pig. Furious at being ignored for a dead pig, Katniss actually secures an astonishing score by skewering the apple right out of the pig's mouth, pinning it to the wall, and proving to these producers that she is undeniably captivating. And they give her an 11 out of 12, not to reward her physical skill, but because she proved she is volatile, dangerous, and makes for absolutely incredible television. Which sets us up for our fourth focus area, the weapon of vulnerability and how it completely alters the rules of engagement. You see, a high training score of 11 makes you a massive target. It immediately shifts the pressure to the final critical hurdle, which is Caesar Flickerman's televised interviews. Sure, an 11 makes you intimidating, but it definitely doesn't make you lovable. Katniss has established the physical threat, but to survive, she absolutely needs emotional investment from the audience. But because she's still trying to play a purely physical game, she is completely unequipped to charm an audience or secure a lifeline. Her mentor, Haymitch, actually dismisses her as a dead slug during prep. She's a fierce, independent hunter who views this entire interview process as a hostile interrogation rather than an opportunity to build emotional currency. But then, Peeta steps out for his interview, and Peeta drops an absolute tactical nuke by inventing the star-crossed lovers narrative. He instantly changes the entire genre of the Capitol's show from bloodlust to tragic romance. When he confesses on live television that the girl he loves is the one who came to the games with him, he fundamentally alters the rules of engagement. You cannot easily root for the brutal decapitation of a boy who is tragically in love with his district partner. He literally just forced millions of viewers to actively want them both to survive. Even though Katniss is so livid she actually shoves Peeta into an urn backstage, cutting his hands, she completely fails to realize he just handed her the ultimate shield. He blurred the line between reality and performance. She screams that he made her look weak, totally missing the PR genius of his move. He weaponized unrequited love to save her life. Because here's the thing, physical armor can be pierced with an arrow, for sure. But parasocial obsession from millions of viewers, that is impenetrable. If the audience believes the narrative, it becomes real currency, meaning food, medicine, and ultimately survival. And that brings us to our fifth and final point, the ultimate rebellion, which is all about refusing to be consumed. So the mechanics of Panem's survival require you to become a consumable product, manipulating a narrative to secure the emotional investment of millions of strangers. Your physical skills matter way less than your ability to project vulnerability and sell your identity to a complicit audience before they'll ever authorize a lifeline. Now, it's really easy to look at that as just some far-off dystopian sci-fi nightmare, but I actually want you to evaluate this for a moment. Look at the architecture of audience manipulation running all around us today.
Ask yourself, how often is curated vulnerability used to trigger your sympathies or to get you to open your wallet? Whether it's the carefully constructed narratives of reality television or the emotional triggers we see in political campaigns or even our 24/7 news cycles, the currencies of image and spectacle are very, very real in our own media ecosystem today.
And this all leads to this profoundly moving moment on the roof, the night before they are thrown into the arena to literally fight to the death. Peter reveals a stunning assertion of humanity. He insists on maintaining his identity against a machine designed to reduce him to a killer. He tells Katniss his ultimate fear isn't dying. He knows he's probably going to die. His ultimate fear is letting the Capitol change him. He wants to show them that they don't own him. His ultimate rebellion is simply wanting to die as himself.
So, when you find yourself trapped in a system engineered to divide you, to quantify your worth, and to consume your identity for its own benefit, we'll leave you to think about how you hold on to who you fundamentally are. Do you play the game by their rules just to survive? Or do you refuse to be just another piece in their puzzle? It's a pretty powerful question, and definitely one worth carrying with you. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the narrative, and I'll catch you next time.